Okay, let's try a little bit with Matlab here. I've started up Matlab on my computer. This is a Macintosh version. I'm not sure how others will be different exactly, but I wanted to talk a little bit about making an M file. So here I would go to New Blank M file. Okay, so it brings up the editor. And so one of the points I wanted to make with this is that when you're doing your project or even doing homework assignments, it's nice to have things saved in an M file, a text file. Then you can run it over and over again or edit it and not have to type everything over and over. And so, for example, if we're, say we're going to do the final project, we might want to start by entering the data. So we could say something like V1 equals 1.056, V2 equals 0.0502, and so forth. We could enter in all the data. We could enter in our H's. H1 equals da 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 da. Okay. We could go on and enter all of the data, the H's, the D's, D1, D2, D3 equal, so forth. We could put in our G's, put in G as a matrix maybe. Then we could do GI, JK when we write our equations. And then we could do equations then. dF1 by d delta equals, and you can put in your equation for whatever you derive that to be. And then when you go down to put in your A matrix, A equals, you could do something like, some of it will be fairly simple with ones and zeros. You can put those in directly if you want to. So forth, but then when you get down to the later rows, pretend like we put in a bunch of rows, we could put in dF1 by d delta 1, and then the next term could be dF1 by d delta 2, and so forth. You could put them in here and build up your whole matrix. Same thing with a B in terms of the variables we've already defined. And then if you would happen to need a mistake or want to change something, then you can go back into your M file and change it. Okay, now let's look at it a little bit more. I've got my M file and I just put in an A matrix that a former student had. So to enter a matrix, A equals square brackets, the semicolons separate the rows, and have a semicolon on the end of the row, then you can go on to the next row and continue on. If you put a semicolon at the end of the statement, then when it calculates it, it won't print out a result. It'll just keep on going to the next one. If you don't, it'll repeat the result. And so I put in A to calculate the eigenvalues of A and eigenvectors. You can have it do a comment like this where it gets two results, put square brackets, M matrix, it'll build the modal matrix of eigenvectors, and then EV it'll make actually a matrix with eigenvalues on the diagonal equals Ig. Okay, M inverse is inverse INV function of M. Put in a B and a C and a D. Just checking things, Jordan form, M inverse A times M, B sub M, M inverse times B, C sub M, C times M. So you could do this to check your observability and controllability. Or if you wanted to do it the other way, you could do P is A as B times AB times all of this, and then check the rank of P, another way to check observability. And you could check controllability as well. Controllability, you could check observability the same way. For your project, a few hints here. You may want to do something like this. Put in the desired eigenvalues. Since this is a real value system, but it has complex eigenvalues, they show up in pairs, and so I would suggest keeping the frequencies. I've done it before and found the frequencies, the imaginary parts, the eigenvalues, keep those the same, but force the real parts to be more negative. And so you could do something like this, lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3, these are desired eigenvalues. Let me show you one thing here. I don't know if that's on the camera. This is the command window of Matlab. If you want to find the identity matrix, of a certain size, you can just write EYE, say a 6 by 6 EYE, gives you identity capital I. Similarly, say EYE3 is a 3 by 3 identity matrix and so forth. So if you're doing some writing out or programming here and you need an identity matrix, you can use EYE. And so for example, if we wanted to calculate our psi matrix, we could say psi is C for state or for output feedback, psi prime actually, C times inverse of lambda I, lambda 1, I minus A times B. And so when we're building our psi matrix, usually when we do it by hand, we do it in general for any lambda. If you don't have the symbolic toolbox, it's kind of hard to do that in Matlab, but you can go ahead and put in the value of lambda and calculate it a few times. So we could do psi 1. It's going to make a whole psi matrix, psi prime matrix with lambda 1 substituted in every value, but we could copy that, paste it, and put in psi 2, lambda 2, and paste it again, and put psi 3, lambda 3. And so instead of doing it generically, we have to do it 3 times, but we just let Matlab do it 3 times, and it's not really that bad. And then when we want to build G prime, we would just take the first column of psi 1, second column of psi 2, third column of psi 3, or however we want to do it. But that's one way to do it. So this statement here, G prime, then would be psi 1, all the rows, first column, psi 2, all of its rows, second column. So this is just Matlab's way of specifying a vector or part of a matrix. And then psi 3 is going to make the third column. So we built our G prime from psi with specific values of lambda substituted in. Matlab calculated a few things we didn't need, but that's okay. And then we can get our E prime. Move this over a little bit, but it's easier to see. Since we use the first column of psi, in the first column of G we have a 1, 0, 0, and then for the second column we use the second column of psi, so 0, 1, 0, and third column, third column. Okay, so then we can calculate our, move these up a little bit so we can see them. For example, K prime then would be negative E prime times the inverse of G prime. And then if we want to check our eigenvalues, we can plug everything back in to see if we actually got the result we wanted. One other thing I guess I'd like to point out is that you can put comments in here. If you put a % sign at the beginning of a row, it's a comment and it doesn't try to evaluate.